Good afternoon, Periscope. You are watching PLMR's election analysis live from Westminster. I am joined today by three of my colleagues from PLMR, and we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion about the election results so far that we've seen coming in throughout the day today. So I'm joined by Kevin Craig, PLMR's Managing Director and a Labour Councillor in Lambeth, Patrick Cousins, who is also part of the team here at PLMR, and he is a Liberal Democrat activist, and also James Ford, who is a senior consultant at PLMR, and he was also he's a former advisor to Boris Johnson. So I think, given the results that have come in so far, James, I think we'll go to you first. This has been the sort of first real test for the government since the general election last year. How have the Conservatives fared today?
I think David Cameron and party chiefs will be very pleased with the results. There may well still be bad news to come from London, but the gains in Scotland were significant, and they'll give David Cameron a nice photo opportunity with a much larger group of MSPs than the party's had for a very long time. The party has done quite well in the local elections, not losing significant numbers of seats. But most of all, they'll be pleased that the headlines today are all about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and Labour's questionable results. And I think the Conservatives will consider that possibly losing control of City Hall might be a reasonable price to pay if it means that Jeremy Corbyn stays in post and is the man that the party fights at the next general election.
I think we'll turn to Corbyn's leadership and sort of what today's results, what today and tomorrow's results mean for Corbyn sort of later on in this discussion. But Kevin, I'd like to turn to you next. I suppose Labour had quite a tumultuous week last week. There was sort of quite a lot of negative press attention around anti-Semitism within the party, and that was sort of a challenge for both Sadiq Khan here in London and Jeremy Corbyn as Labour went into these elections. But in general, from the results we've seen so far today, how do you think Labour have fared?
Well, I spent all of yesterday out campaigning for Sadiq Khan in London. There's no doubt in my mind he's won comfortably as Mayor of London. I don't think all the noise around the Ken Livingstone anti-Semitism row last week's had any impact on Sadiq Khan's vote in London. I think Tom Watson, the leader of the Labour Party, called it right this morning, the deputy leader of the Labour Party rather, called it right this morning when he said that MPs need to give Jeremy Corbyn's leadership some more space and time. It is only eight or 9 months in. The results could have been a lot worse around the country, but they're good in London. Scotland was always going to be a meltdown for Labour. I mean, there are no Labour heartlands left in Scotland. It was going to be and has proven to be a disaster. And the key thing is it means Jeremy Corbyn's leadership is not under threat. Knocking on doors yesterday, albeit in London, where I was, there is a lot of support for Jeremy Corbyn amongst the grassroots. There are people that you meet who would consider joining the Labour Party now because of him, and that's just how it is. So somehow the Parliamentary Labour Party is going to have to find it in itself to come together and try and help Jeremy and his team to reach out more effectively than they have done hitherto.
And speaking of the sort of grassroots, a party that's been flying a bit more under the radar, I suppose since a bit of a disaster, the general election last year, the Liberal Democrats. Patrick, what's today been like for the Lib Dems?
I think it's quite early to say how the party's doing in England. They're up at the moment in time speaking about 20 seats. I think it's a quietly impressive result, but it's early days. In Scotland, the party's been beaten into 5th place by the Greens, and in Wales it faces wipeout. There's been a bit of a UKIP resurgence in Wales, and that's altered the political scenario there. I think these are important elections for the Liberal Democrats to show that they are holding on, and that there is life in the party. They will want to show some signs of life, because it was a kicking last year. It was a real kicking. So anything to give party members and give voters reason to believe that over the course of the next few years, those local election gains, which have traditionally been so important for Liberal Democrats, can provide a good base for general elections in 2020.
And James, do you have any sort of particular thoughts actually on sort of the growth of UKIP and what's the electorate trying to say?
I think, like most of the political parties, UKIP can point to a mixed set of results. There are things to crow about, like getting 7 seats in Wales, even if it means giving new life to the political career of Neil Hamilton. They can point to those kind of things. Coming second behind Labour in a lot of large local authorities and in the by-election in Sheffield. But it's yet another false dawn for UKIP. They should be capitalising on all the attention they're getting from the referendum speculation. This should be their moment, and yet again, they're failing to make a really big leap through. There was no breakthrough, just some steady, moderate gains in a few areas. They may well gain a member of the London Assembly tonight, but they're also probably going to come fifth in London. So there should be concern at UKIP headquarters that they are not making the headway they need if they're going to present themselves as a credible, permanent force in British politics.
Okay, and so Kevin, coming back, I think, to Jeremy Corbyn, from the results we've seen so far, and then pollsters are, we are expecting Sadiq to sort of win comfortably. What does this mean? Whilst Jeremy may be sort of more popular in London, what nationally do these results mean for the Labour leadership?
Well, there's no doubt that the Labour leadership needs to be more effective at reaching outside of traditional Labour heartlands. That is the challenge, basically. I mean, over the next few years, the challenge is how do you communicate to the British population that Jeremy Corbyn is of prime ministerial calibre. That is the issue. That's why the concerns about that are why some Labour MPs were, I think, far too quick out of the blocks in the last 24 hours to criticise him and his leadership. But there's a long way to go. But in London, that's traditionally been strong territory for Labour. And in some places, such as Crawley, Labour has done well under Jeremy's leadership. So the story is not all bad, but big picture-wise, at this point of the cycle, between general elections, the lead party of opposition at Westminster normally does better, and that is the challenge that has to be faced. But it could have been a lot worse, and that overwhelmingly is the feeling amongst Jeremy and his team this morning.
Okay, thank you. I think finally coming to Patrick, before we run out of time, speaking of the Liberal Democrats, finally, where now for the Lib Dems?
As I say, I think the crucial thing, community politics and local politics have always been such areas of strength for the Liberal Democrats. And we're building on those at every possible opportunity, every election, every by-election over the next few years will be so important to help build some sense of momentum and credibility. After the election in 2015, a lot was made of the surge in membership, as there was for the Labour Party, and building on those gains and really turning those extra members into people who will go out and do the campaigning and do the phone calls and do the hard lifting to get the Liberal Democrats back into a position where they're a force in British politics again will be the key challenge over the next few years. And there's no opportunity to be missed because there's a long way to go.
Yeah, because I'm not sure, you see, what the Lib Dems are for. Do you know what I mean? I mean, the Greens, we all know what the Greens are for, it's environment-led. Labour is basically part of economic social justice, for balance between the rich and poor. The Conservatives is in the name, conserve, keep it as it is. What are the Lib Dems for these days?
The Lib Dems are for a nice mixture between the first two things, but the Lib Dems are different. They're a different party for different people who are there in the party. For me, they've always been a party who do preserve social justice, but are quite kind of practical. I suppose you could say, if you were being cynical, that they haven't usually had the weight of having to make decisions in government upon their shoulders, so they've been able to come out with quite distinctive and quite evidence-based and quite forward-thinking policy positions, which maybe wouldn't appeal to the electorate, but they certainly have always appealed to me, and I think that they need to get that kind of principled, forward-thinking, slightly differentiated position back if they're going to regain voters in time for the next general election.
And I suppose, are there any final thoughts about what the political landscape may be looking like over the next month in particular, given we've got a referendum coming up fairly soon?
Yeah, sorry to jump in again, but the referendum is the key thing now, and I think the referendum will be won by Remain. I think it will be quite a narrow win. It needs to be more than 10% percentage points, I think, to put the question to bed for a couple of generations. the media, which has loved to focus on blue action in terms of the internal divisions in the Conservative Party, and the media, which is predominantly led by anti-European media owners, we have to hope that the wider arguments about geopolitical stability, peace, employment reform, prosperity, and a progressive force in Europe. We have to hope that that comes across, and that the argument is one on immigration, on border control, and all these things which people are right to be concerned about. But that now, because if it's not, then we could see a change in Prime Minister within weeks. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I think a big challenge for the Conservatives is how the party reunites after the result, whatever it is. Whether or not there are profoundly huge defections to UKIP off the back of it, or whether on the back of a particularly inconclusive result, UKIP ceases to be a relevant force in politics, because this is the one thing they've been calling for years. So if the referendum doesn't go their way, you could then start to pose the kind of Lib Dem question about what's the point of UKIP.
Well, it's going to be an interesting couple of days and an interesting month ahead. Kevin, Patrick, James, thank you so much for joining me today. We are expecting the sort of mayoral mayor candidate to be confirmed sort of later today. PLMR will be putting out more analysis on that on Monday morning, so do keep your eye out for that. In the meantime, you can follow us at PLMR Ltd on Twitter for sort of live election updates as and when they come through. We've also been doing mayoral analysis throughout the mayoral campaign, so you can sort of go back and have a look at that on londonvotes2016.co.uk. And for more sort of information about PLMR and to read some more of our sort of political analysis and media analysis, go to plmr.co.uk. Thanks a lot for tuning in.